Greetings and God's peace be with you. My name is Christopher Lynn Payne, and I serve as canon to the Ordinary for Leadership in the Episcopal Diocese of Maryland. In January of 2024, we hosted an event called Vestry Vitality Day. This is an experience that our diocese has hosted over many years, and each year it looks a little bit different depending upon what the needs are in our congregations and across the diocese, and really in trying to be as attuned as we can to the movement of God as the Holy Spirit calls us forward in our life together as a community of love. This year, part of what our work doing was exploring what it means to love your neighbor as yourself. God has commanded us to love our neighbor as ourselves, but is it possible to really love your neighbor if you don't know your neighbor? And so part of what our Vestry Vitality Day presentations offer are 3 different tools that can help you as a disciple of Jesus and as a leader in your ministry context to be able to engage your wider community, to grow in relationship, and to be more and more about the work of love and justice in your ministry context. Our first presentation is from the Reverend Canon Kristen Krantz. She is our canon for transitions in the diocese and also the director of the College for Congregational Development. Kristen will be teaching on a model called Faith Development in Community, and you'll get a chance to learn from her about the impact that has had on her in the ministry that she's been a part of, and also just to go more deeply into that model. So I hope you enjoy.
So my name is Kristen Krantz, and I serve as the new canon for transitions here in the diocese and also as the director for the College for Congregational Development here in the diocese. And so what I'm going to be sharing with you today and what we will be using for some reflection in your groups on your sites is one of our models from the college. And so let me start by saying, what do we mean by a model? In the college, we talk about models as lenses. Different models, different theories help us see our congregations in different ways and kind of magnify certain facets of our communities. And so these happen to be my computer glasses because I'm going to be looking at my computer in order to do a slideshow with you in just a moment. I've got sunglasses, I've got my progressive lenses. Each of those different lenses help me see the world differently, and just like that, different models help us see our congregations differently. So the model I want to share with you today is called Faith Development in Community, as Christopher referenced earlier. And so now we are going to take a quick moment for me to hopefully get the tech right and to share a PowerPoint. All right. Oh, and I've got a fun graphic. Let's see if I can stop it now where you can see it. Okay, so faith development in community. Well, really, folks, it's what it says on the box. This model helps us look at how people are developing their faith in our communities. And a lot of times we also kind of use this model to look at and understand what membership means in our congregations. And I would say a more traditional understanding of membership is kind of like who's in and who's out, who shows up on Sundays and who doesn't. And there are certainly some things that are important metrics around that. We still count average Sunday attendance along with average weekly impact or attendance as well. But faith development community looks at membership in a different way. And it begins with a deep understanding that God calls people at all stages of faith development into our communities. There's something about each of your individual communities that has drawn in the people who are there. So let's just start by looking at, whoops, wrong one, here we go. Let's start by looking at that, at this model and the pieces of this model. So this model is going to kind of look like a bullseye, and you'll see here in the very middle of the bullseye, we have a group called mature practitioners. It's important to note that Each of these concentric circles, we have a name for them. They are not meant to be evaluative or to be judgy. They're really meant to be descriptive. And so what do we mean by mature practitioners? What we mean by this is these are folks who, first of all, use your congregation and the unique things that you offer to develop their faith. And these are the folks who are really plugged in to the things you offer in your congregation to deepen their faith and to really live that baptismal identity in the deepest way possible. They are the magnetic or spiritual center and core of your community. So these are people who are going to regularly attend worship. These are people who are going to use the things that your church offers, the formation you offer, the ministries you offer, the outreach and service opportunities that you offer, the things that your congregation does. These are the people who are at the heart of those pieces of your community. So sometimes they have formal leadership positions. Maybe it's your senior warden. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's that person that everybody references and said, I know that we don't call people saints until they've passed, but if there was ever a living saint, it's Lois. And Lois, I guarantee you then, is one of those mature practitioners. So these, again, what makes someone a mature practitioner doesn't mean that independently they are a good and faithful person, because everyone who's showing up in your congregations are good and faithful people. What makes them mature practitioners in your congregation is that they use your congregation. So here's an example of that. My parents are mature practitioners at their church, St. Paul's in Jeffersonville, Indiana. They participate in everything. They have been in lots of leadership positions. They attend all the events and support lots of different ministries. They are mature practitioners at St. Paul's. When they came to my church when I was serving at St. James in Mount Airy, they were not mature practitioners of St. James Mount Airy. They were folks that came a few times a year when they would come to visit me, or even at the start of the pandemic when their church took a little bit of it took them a little while to kind of sort out how they were going to do online worship. So my folks joined my church on Zoom for probably a good month and a half. Again, they are deeply faithful people that are connected to a church and mature practitioners there, but not in my community. So again, this is what I mean by this is descriptive language, not evaluative. So what's the next circle, you might ask? Well, the next circle out is Sunday sacramentalists. And again, not evaluative language, but trying to describe what we mean. And what we mean by Sunday sacramentalists are these are people who have formed a regular habit of worship in your community. Probably it's your Sunday primary service. Maybe you're a congregation that has a really popular Tuesday morning prayer service before work. So maybe it's somebody who regularly attends there. These are folks that are still going to come to some events and maybe do some Bible study, but they're not quite as plugged in. They haven't quite internalized and lived out that baptismal identity in quite the same way as your mature practitioners. They are present, but they are not quite in that center group. And again, this is not a judgment, because they are using your congregation, primarily worship, as how they develop their faith in your community. And so for Sunday sacramentalists, things that are really important are the worship service. They are fed by your sermons, by praying together, by communion. And that is how they are engaging your community to grow deeper in faith. The next circle out are occasional attenders. And my folks, as I said, they are not mature practitioners at the church where I last served. They were occasional attenders, because occasional attenders are folks that show up a few times a year. Maybe it's your Christmas and Easter people. Maybe it's the folks that bring their dog or their cat every year for the St. Francis pet blessing, or they always come to your Shrove Tuesday pancake supper. Maybe these are folks that come because they are attending a funeral for a family member or a friend. Or maybe these are folks who live half the year close to your community, and then they live the other half of the year or part of the year somewhere else. And so they have a different rhythm of worship, and you might not be their only congregation, but you're the one that they attend when they are local. The last ring of this model are folks that we call vicariously connected. And these are folks that don't attend worship, but nevertheless, they still have some concrete connection to your community. They might be guests of your congregants that come to an event, like a music concert or a supper or a fundraiser that you do. These could be folks that are parts of groups that use your space, whether that's a 12-step group or the Irish dance group that rents space from you. These could also be people who are connected with the ministries that you do out in the community. So my last church, St. James in Mount Airy, we had both a thrift shop and a nursery school. And so even though the folks that worked and shopped at our thrift shop probably did not come to worship, and even though the majority of our students at our nursery school and their families also were not members of the congregation, they're still vicariously connected to our community. There was some piece of their identity that was connected to St. James. And even more broadly, these are the people who somehow think of your community as their own. Again, they're not showing up for worship. They don't go to church. But if they were going to go to a church, yours would be the one that they would go to. Maybe they drive past your church every day or walk past it on their way to work, but you exist in their mind and in their life in some way. So, mature practitioners, Sunday sacramentalists, occasional attenders, and vicariously connected. In this model on the screen, it looks like these are hard, set, and fast demarcated circles. And that's actually not the case. I would invite you to think of these lines between them not as solid fences or walls, but rather as permeable barriers. And part of our job is to meet people where they are, because they are in one of these rings because they are showing up at your congregation to use what you are offering to develop their faith. But to understand that part of our job as leaders is to create appropriate pathways and invitations for people to draw closer in and to develop their faith more deeply. And so here's an example that I learned from someone else in the college, and it was a really great thing. So one of the things I realized at my last congregation is that our 12-step groups and our nursery school entrance, they came in through the back entrance of our church. The front entrance had lots of bulletin boards with all of our upcoming events and worship times and all of the community activities. But we were not showing any of that to anyone who came in the back entrance. And so a way to create just a little opening pathway from those who were vicariously connected to perhaps become occasional attenders was we hung a bulletin board by that back entrance where we could keep all of our announcements and events and things front and center so that anyone who came in through that door saw those as well. I mean, it occurred to me for years, people who had been coming to NA, if they ever wanted to show up on a Sunday, how would they even know when our worship services were? Yes, they can check our website, but it's a way of building a slight opening and an invitation deeper. What might it look like to build an invitation from an occasional tender into that Sunday sacramentalist circle? That's something I would invite you to think about. I'm guessing some of you even have stories which you can share in a moment. I'm going to move on to the next slide because I want to talk about when we use this model, what is the role of congregational leaders in thinking about and using this model? The first one is to hold on, I'm going to just do this because I'm not sure if it's blocking the screen. The first one is to welcome people where they are, and when they are ready, invite them to go deeper into in our congregation in their life of faith. So it's a way for us as leaders to kind of pay attention, to look and say, hey, I noticed that this family came at Christmas and they came again at Easter, and maybe they came again another Sunday after Easter. And before we get into sort of the summer lull, when everybody's in and out and going everywhere, how can we connect with them to perhaps get them, make the invitation, to have a conversation with them and begin to get to know them a little better, but also to connect them with other things that are going on. Do we have VBS coming up this summer? Is there a summer service trip that the teenagers are doing that their kids could be involved in? Is there some summer outreach program that we have going on that we could involve them in? So to think about the ways that we can meet people where they are, and when they are ready, to invite them closer and deeper in. Another role, hold on. Okay. See, I knew this was going to happen, Jason. I'm having a tech. Oh, there we go. There we go. Okay. Another part of our role as congregational leaders is to create specific pathways between and among people at different stages of their faith. Do you remember how I talked about mature practitioners as that magnetic spiritual core of your community? I mean that magnetic piece on purpose, because there's something about those folks who are so deeply faithful in your community and the ways that they use what your community offers, that those are the perfect people to begin to invite people in. And so a great thing that I've seen done in some congregations is how it is that you kind of match up some of those spiritual centered people with newcomers, with people, even if it's just an introduction at coffee hour, but to create pathways so that people at different points of their spiritual faith, of their faith development, come in contact and begin to get to know each other, because that is a way of facilitating people growing deeper in faith in your community. And lastly, it is to nurture the most mature Christians in your congregation, because their energy, as I said, is the spiritual heart of your congregation. And so something that this model tells us that we should pay attention to are those people who are in that mature practitioner circle. And that part of our role of leaders is to pay attention to their spiritual health, because they are that spiritual core of our communities. So it might seem like what we are building with this model is a hierarchy, right? Where you're vicariously connected, and then you ascend to a Sunday sacramentalist, and then so on and so forth, except those two are flipped. I just found an edit for future versions. But the point here is that this model is not describing a hierarchy. It is not a hierarchy. It is, in fact, perhaps more like a labyrinth. If you think about a labyrinth, there's only one way in and out. But once we enter into a life of faith, it's usually not a straight path. There are usually lots of turns and switchbacks. And the reality is that not only is this a model about inviting people deeper, but it's also important for us as leaders to understand that individual people will also cycle in and out, kind of like these twists and turns and switchbacks of a labyrinth. People will cycle in and out of these phases of development in our communities. So perhaps a pattern that you've seen as well, one that I've noticed, is that a lot of times when families have younger children through teenagers, they're really involved. They are our Sunday sacramentalists. They are perhaps even our mature practitioners. They are very engaged because they want their kids to have that faith development that is so important. And then when their kids graduate and go to college, suddenly I'm not seeing those parents as often, sometimes, not always. But that's a natural thing. they might kind of sink back into occasional attenders. And then sometimes I've also seen folks that are occasional attenders, but maybe they've had something that's happened in their life where suddenly the church has really supported them and rallied them. And before you know it, that person has engaged with your community in such a way that they are now a mature practitioner. So I like this image of the labyrinth because, first of all, it shows us this is not a hierarchy. Our life of faith is not a maze, but is more like a labyrinth. But also, it's a recognition that while we do want to create pathways for people to grow deeper in faith, that it's also natural and probably healthy for people to kind of work their way in and out of these different rings throughout their own faith life and their own faith development. So I am a little ahead of schedule, but that happens when there's only one of us talking instead of two. But we are going to go ahead and go to your questions for reflection, and we'll give you a half an hour to do this. And so what I invite you to do in each of your sites is to break into pairs or triads, or if you're there with a group from your congregation, just gather with your group. If you're here single, then try and connect up with some others. But 3 questions for reflection as you think of this model and of these ways of understanding how people are using your congregation to develop their faith life. So how is it that your congregation is meeting people where they are and inviting them to go deeper? How might you strengthen and enrich the center of life in your congregation? So how is it that you can support those mature practitioners? And who are those who are connected in different ways to your community? And how are you providing them what you need? And this one is specifically kind of looking more at the outer rings, so occasional attenders and vicariously connected. I think it's a really interesting thing to think about how it is that you are actually giving them what they need. So I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to let you go to small groups, and we will come back in half an hour. I'm going to just start sharing some of the things that were raised up in your small groups. So for question 1, the group that is out at All Saints Episcopal Church talked about joining peripheral groups. Oops, hold on. What's going on here? Got it. Joining peripheral groups for meals or public events to engage in fellowship. They're talking about EFM and inviting leaders in the church to lead formation. That's a great way to draw people deeper. Engaging in one-on-one relationship building. You're going to get some really great resources on one-on-one things today. So that is a fantastic way to draw people deeper into your community and into formation. And being intentional about connecting. Absolutely. For question 2, things that surfaced for the All Saints cohort were, which is not just All Saints people, the All Saints site is probably a better way of saying it, is things like formation programming, fellowship, in-reach, being just as important as outreach, inviting the Sunday sacramentalists and occasional attenders to share a meal outside of worship. Fantastic. One of my favorite it's a tiny little book. It's called Eucharist with a small e. And it's this beautiful meditation that looks at all of the meals that Jesus shared throughout his ministry prior to the Last Supper, prior to that Eucharist with a big E, and just looks at the centrality of how meals can be so formational for spiritual development and connection. So absolutely, anytime you can gather for a meal. And also looking at adapting meetings to special needs of families. Yes, time, when can you offer things? Childcare, is it available? All those things. And for question 3, looked at rebranding so that our church is open and welcoming. I'd like to hear more about that rather than restrictive. Seeing the red door as an invitation and not a barrier. I like that. And creating more opportunities for people to come through the side doors, like the preschools, the fellowship events, the engaging groups that meet on your campus. And it's important to remember that not everybody is going to necessarily enter these pathways that you are creating. And that's okay, because whatever you're doing is meeting their needs. And so we want to love them where they are. And because we love them, of course, we want them to come deeper as well. Let me see what else is here. Meeting members of the community to understand and meet their needs. We're going to hear more about that later today as well. You guys are hitting on the whole theme for today. Providing common ground for relationship building. They're talking about a craft fair where all the vendors have special needs. Really great stuff. Being engaged in the community outside of the church and extending invitations. This is great. Let's see. Where's Lucia? What site is Lucia?
St. John's, Ellicott City.
St. John's, Ellicott City. Fantastic. So the St. John's cohort has a few things here. Identifying folks in the congregation who naturally welcome people in. Absolutely. Invite newcomers and occasional attenders to participate in activities. That's a great way to get them in. Look for ways to reach out to the broader community. And here's a question. If it's not a hierarchy, what does it mean to go deeper for that outer circle? Absolutely. Doing a lot for mature practitioners, need to focus more on vicarious to strengthen support for them. Yeah, I mean, we definitely, the whole idea is that we do want to create pathways, natural pathways. And one way of thinking of it, and you kind of reference it here, is to lower barriers, right? For people to engage deeper. But what does it mean to go deeper if it's not a hierarchy? What it means is that our hope, our desire is that people do want to grow deeper in their faith life and in developing their faith. And because of lots of different reasons, there may be barriers in people's lives even that keep them from that, even if we remove as many barriers as we can. One time I heard a trainer teaching this model say that the goal is not actually to have an entire community of mature practitioners. Like, that's not actually a healthy model. In fact, if everyone is as deeply involved as that, then it's not so much a faith community as it is a cult. And so in the PDF I'm going to send you, part of what you'll see is different churches that have different configurations of this, where they might have a bigger center and smaller outer rings, or they might have a small center and a small Sunday sacramentalist, but a huge occasional attender. So the model in the PDF I'm going to send you will help you, I think, go even deeper in understanding what we mean by not a hierarchy. Lucia's St. John's group also said to plan an online hybrid event for a large group of online worshipers and to empower lay leaders to allow them to shine. Fantastic. That is super important. Let's see. Scott is the person out at Emmanuel. Emmanuel is revitalizing their committees. We need to simplify and de-jargon our messaging about what we offer. Absolutely. That just even calling it the narthex, like we're meeting at the narthex, or the other jargon that we use in the church, that can be a barrier to people. Like, what is a narthex and how do I get there? So that's a great insight. And small group ministries, realizing that we already have a lot of these, and treating them like ministries. So Altar Guild was the example they gave. Yes, it's not just a group of people to do something. It is a ministry that has a spiritual heart to it. Back to St. John's, Ellicott City here, proactively pulling in new folks, offering them to ways for them to join and volunteer, recognizing where folks are in the congregation and figuring out how to build on that. Yep. Let's see, Derek Miller, I'm guessing St. Peter's. Yeah, I wasn't sure if they were on site there, but St. Peter's in Ellicott City. We talked about how we could provide more connection opportunities between our preschool and church. That is fantastic for parents and shared events, worship in a historic Main Street community. And as a community that has experienced trauma, creating space to share that and support with one another. They also have a labyrinth that's underutilized. Yeah, that's a great resource. That is a great resource. And I've seen some really creative sort of public-facing ways of using labyrinths that can really engage the wider community. So what a great resource. Carrie Graves, so I think this is the folks here on site at Diocesan Center during the pandemic, when socialization went away for all ages. How can we promote socialization for all? That's a really great question, and that's going to be unique to each community. One idea is to create an annual service to honor those who partner with your congregation. What a fantastic idea. I love that. And it's a great way to bring perhaps some people into worship, but also for your community to offer a spiritual blessing for those organizations. And here we've got from Ascension Westminster. Hello, folks. We realize we do not meet the needs of our young adults and people who work. Most activities are during the day. Yeah. So another thing this model can help us do is, as we look at who is in these, in our communities, who are in these rings of development, to figure out like where are the gaps. And you just identified a really important one. Back to Diocesan Center, to have a Sunday to give out gift baskets. You have to attend to receive the gift basket. It's a chance to gather and appreciate folks. That sounds fun. Who doesn't like a gift basket? And back to Westminster, we invite people to come to our church. Outreach gives money to the community, and now there's a desire to go into the community and serve. Fantastic. Diocesan Center, one congregation has a monthly senior lunch that pulls from 2 senior centers. Experienced a big drop during COVID and would like to find ways to engage many more seniors in that. That sounds like a really great outreach activity, and to get real curious about who isn't there and who you could get back, or who are new people that you could reach out to. St. John's and St. Mark's are interested in collaborating more together. Love to hear collaborations. Some of the most fruitful ministry that I've had the privilege to do over the last 2 decades has been when 2 or more churches have come together in some way to worship, to do outreach, or to do formation. So I will always lift that up. Let's see, we've got St. Luke's. Knowing that many folks don't have time, interest, or extroversion to attend discussion groups, etc., publish a What St. Luke's Reading, Watching, Listening list on the website in the parish hall. Well, that's fun. I always love to get good recommendations. To put up a bulletin board where everyone is walking by and can add what they are reading, watching, listening. Yeah, I love this idea. And it will be, like you said, everybody walking by. So perhaps not just your folks that regularly attend worship, but perhaps other groups that are using your space as well. And I love that level of engagement. Wishing to highlight the importance of connecting with the community as our mission. Absolutely. And St. Luke's, we've got one last thing here. Don't assume that St. Luke's has to do it all for our parish's spiritual fulfillment. It's super stressful, not possible anyway. We can ask, share, and direct one another to other resources we use and love. Things like the Claggett Center, the Center for Action, Contemplation, etc. Yeah, so I'm hearing out of, yeah. Okay, oh, there's Q&A. Oh, there's more technology. I'll get there, I promise, Q&A. I think it sounds like St. Luke's, you guys really have some energy around resource sharing, which is a really great way to offer people ways to grow deeper in their faith development. Okay, I'm switching to Q&A now. In St. George's in Hampstead, in response to question 1, they talked about being welcoming but not overbearing, coffee hour, koinonia is essential. Absolutely. In another model in the college, one of the things we talk about is having a functional and appropriate coffee hour. And yes, not overbearing being the key there. For question 2, you talked about the recognition that the current climate culture has changed. It certainly has. And to make appropriate adjustments and adaptations. So new opportunities or ways of worshiping finding ways to avoid burnout of mature practitioners. And that right there, you hit it on the nose. One of the ways that we care for our mature practitioners and the ways that we support them is to help them avoid burnout. And so there are different ways to do that, of course. And lastly, question 3, we live in a community has become predominantly 70%, according to latest statistics, a commuting community. So what recommendations do you have for ministering to that demographic? Oh boy, if I had the perfect answer to that question, then, well, first of all, I would love to share it, but that is a huge thing that I know I struggled with in my last congregation. And over the course of 8 years, having a really hard time finding a sweet spot for some ministries because of that exact dynamic, especially for working families, and how we created events and connection for our families with young children who were regularly commuting. So I don't have answers to that, Mario, but I would love to sit down and get curious together and dream together, because I do think that maybe somebody in this wider group has great answer to that. But I do think that coming up with ideas and trying things out is the only way to find what works in your context, in your community. And sometimes it really is trying several different things, including asking for feedback and some surveys or conversations and one-on-ones with people. But one last Q&A, what is a healthy composition of these groups? And Lucia, that is a fantastic question, and there's no one right answer to that. And part of what you'll see, and what I just did not have time to cover in today's presentation, is in the PDF I'm going to send you. It looks at, like I said, different compositions in a few different communities and what their rings look like, because there's no one right answer for that. It really is going to depend on your community and the different ways that your community offers things that develop the faith of the people who are attracted and attached to your community. So I'm going to give you the PDF in just a few minutes. I'll drop it into the chat during the break. And then you can always email me if you have questions or want to discuss. I will also put my email in the chat when I drop the PDF so that you have a way to reach me. What else do I have? The book, I almost forgot. So this book, everybody, is called Vital Christian Communities, 12 Characteristics of Healthy Congregations. So the authors of this are Alyssa Newton and Phil Brochard. This is a book that is a shorthand of several of the core models and congregational and organization development theories that we work with in the College for Congregational Development. As you can see, it's not a big book, but it has lots of great introduction to these things that can help equip your leaders and your congregation to be more healthy, effective, and faithful. And it's got great resources in the back. In the appendix, it's got some retreat ideas. So if you're looking for a vestry retreat, there's some great ideas in here. And so I just highly recommend this book to anybody that would like to go deeper into the world of congregational development and organization development, and consider attending the College for Congregational Development this June. Registration is live on our diocesan website right now.
Can I enter into the frame with you?
Sure. Come on in, Christopher. There's our eye line.
Hi. I know Kristen won't be able to hear your applause, but I'd like to just thank Canon Kristen for her great work. Hopefully she'll feel the vibration of all the applause that's sure. erupting across the diocese.
No applause needed.
So, and thank you all for your engagement with this. It was incredible to hear the things coming out of the chat. I know it's challenging to figure out how to engage in these different tools of technology, but it's wonderful to hear the learning and discussion that's happening. So we're going to take a quick break now until 11 a.m. and then we're going to gather back. Please get back promptly because Christina Paglianone and Ken Phelps are up next to talk about relational one-to-one meetings. So
Yeah.
we'll see you soon.
Great. Thanks so much.
I hope you enjoyed that presentation from Ken and Kristen. I know it gave me a lot to think about, even though I am a trainer within the College for Congregational Development myself. Each time I see these models taught, it gives me something to think about and pray about, and it challenges me to grow in my ministry. So I hope you learned some good things from that. Our next presentation is from two clergy in the diocese. Christina Paglinauen is the Associate Rector at Redeemer in Baltimore and a member of the steering team for Baltimoreans United in Leadership Development, a almost 50-year-old community organizing entity here in Baltimore. And Ken Phelps is the priest in charge at Holy Trinity in Essex. Ken has a long-standing background with community organizing and how it can be applied in congregational development. And both Christina and Ken know each other pretty well, but they are modeling and teaching us about how to use relational one-to-one meetings as a tool to help build community, to really love your neighbor as yourself in this really simple but also radical way. So enjoy their presentation, and thanks for listening. I wish I could see you, but it's good to be with you. So our next module will be with Christina Paglinauen and Ken Phelps. I've known the two of them for, between both of you, over 40 years, so 20 plus, and so it's a joy to have the both of them here to do some really great teaching on relational one-to-one meetings. Before we jump into that, just a quick word on logistics and so because this is the first time as the diocese we're doing this in this way, we're learning at each stage of this. So what we've discovered is that we were already planning to send a follow-up email that would include some resources to all of you as participants, but we're going to be gathering something that'll be much more significant. That'll include like the recordings of all of the webinar presentations, but PDFs, your neighborhood insight report. So just bear that in mind, that you will get something that will likely be an email that has a series of links. So you'll have access to those things. As we go through this, we'll be tracking the things that we want to share, but we've discovered that that's going to be the best way to give you these tools as you move forward. So with that, Christina and Ken, it's on to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Christopher. Good morning, everyone. It is good to be with you in this virtual hybrid way. Again, my name is Christina Paglinauen, and I serve as the Associate for Community Engagement at the Church of the Redeemer, and I'm acting priest in charge as our rector, David Ware, is on sabbatical. And I also serve on the executive and strategy teams of BUILD, Baltimoreans United in Leadership Development. And Ken.
And I'm Ken Phelps, a retired priest in the Diocese of Maryland. Although I'm not retired, I serve part-time as the priest in charge for Holy Trinity Essex, but also work as a co-facilitator for the Maryland Episcopal Public Policy Network, which means that right now this is a busy time for us as the session in Annapolis is well underway. And no stranger to organizing more relational one-on-one meetings.
So Ken and I are very, very excited to be able to share what has become, I know, for both him and me, a foundational tool for ministry, really. And so when Christopher invited us to be part of this, I said yes, and then I invited Ken to join me, and he said yes, thankfully. So I've got a PowerPoint now that hopefully will pull up here. So again, we are part of this Vitality Day, engaging in the relational one-to-one meeting. And just a couple of words for thought here. Ed Chambers, who was a very early leader in community organizing and the executive director of IAF, which is our oldest community organizing network in the country, talked about the relational meeting as a meeting of spirits. When the relational meeting is happening and people are willing to be vulnerable and share each other's stories, it is really sacred ground that we're talking about. It's a mixing of spirits. And of course, the second group of words there are familiar to most of us, I think. Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew talks about wherever 2 or 3 are gathered, there I am. And so that's just another way to think about the one-on-one is a space where individuals encounter the risen Christ through and in one another. And of course, there are numerous examples in Scripture of Jesus having an encounter with a human being and having that be transformational and life-changing and life-giving. And so I like to think of Jesus as the master of the one-on-one. And there are just some examples there. Jesus and Zacchaeus, I see you come down from that tree. Guess what? I'm staying at your house tonight. Jesus and the Samaritan woman at the well, who told her everything about her life and also created space to listen to her story. And Jesus and Nicodemus coming to Jesus under cover of night, and all the metaphor around that. And then as a result, one might surmise from that encounter, Nicodemus at the end of that gospel is willing to show up in daylight as a follower of Jesus. So those are just some examples in Scripture of how Jesus engages with people relationally, one-to-one, and it's life-giving and transformative. So what is a one-to-one relational meeting? Face-to-face. When we were in the throes of the pandemic, I did practice one-to-one meetings on Zoom. Did you?
I did the same. And because, again, it's important to keep those connections, continue to make those connections.
Yeah. Ideally, always face-to-face in person is ideal. With someone, another member of your institution, your neighborhood, or your wider community, with this simple and profound agenda of just getting to know one another better, getting to know someone and also being willing to be known. Is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, and I think that's the point, and I think you expressed that perfectly. I mean, we do create a sacred space, and there's that, as you said, that vulnerability that's present, and we'll talk about the 3 C's in a little bit, but there's the courage that it takes, too, to allow yourself to be open in such a way, and the courage also to want to probe in a very gentle way into someone else's story.
Yes.
And as we saw when we broke into the sessions just a few minutes ago, just the incredible energy that's created as people start talking and sharing their stories.
And you just reminded me in Christopher's opening frame, the invitation to love our neighbors, and how can we love our neighbors if we don't know our neighbors? And all the data and statistics in the world can't really replace. They're helpful, absolutely, and strategic. And there's really nothing like getting to know someone one-to-one. So some basics. We're talking about a 30 to 45 minute meeting. Face-to-face, there's usually an initiator, right? So there's one person who says, I want to get to know Ken better. So I'm going to invite him to have a one-on-one. Could be over coffee, or tea. It could be after coffee hour or during coffee hour. It could be over a walk, but it's initiated by one person who really wants to take the time to get to know someone else better.
And for me, over coffee is always preferred. So
Yeah, good to know.
it is good to know.
Good to know.
I brought
What kind of coffee?
hot.
Okay. All right. And again, with whom people in your institution, your neighborhood, your community, could be members of organizations and groups that you're already participating in. I know at our 8 o'clock Sunday morning congregation, there are folks who have sat in the pews next to each other or behind or in front of each other for decades and really don't yet know one another's stories. And so when we began really focusing on this as something that we were being intentional about at the Church of the Redeemer, we had an 8 o'clock service where we invited folks during sermon time to have a one-to-one relational meeting. And it was someone in one pew asking someone in the other pew, let's have a one-on-one. Really, the focus of the one-to-one meeting is story telling and sharing and being able to allow the person that you're with to share a story or two that was really transformative, something that was life-changing, and then for you yourself as the initiator to also be able to share, tell your story, so to speak.
And
Yeah.
and there's an intentionality about that you need to in a sense strategize about how you're going to do this. And as Christina mentioned, it's not just members of your immediate community, it's how you then take that out into the community that lies beyond the traditional four walls of your church. I know when I'm mentioning it too as a ministry tool. In my first year of my former call, I made the goal of doing 100 one-on-ones, relational meetings, and I actually did over that. I kept a log of who I had met with and whom I had talked to. And it was not just members of the parish getting to know them better, but it was also reaching out and finding members of the community that I thought strategizing would be helpful in the promotion of our mission, looking for partners and potential partners in how we live the gospel as members of our parish.
You'll see the last bullet point I have there, that as the person who's initiating the one-on-one, it's really most of what you're doing is listening and being fully present, and then asking questions led by your curiosity, and we'll go into that a little more, to be able to go deeper. And only about 20%, again, I mean, these are just rough percentages, but the sharing, of course, is so that you're also modeling vulnerability, and it doesn't feel like the total focus is just on that person, and that you're not willing to share anything.
Yeah, and you'll make that point. I mean, we're not doing therapy. That's
Yes,
not the
we're
point of
gonna.
this.
That's right. There's a slide about that actually.
Yeah, well, that's very good.
Okay. So the elements of a one-on-one are you frame the conversation, introduce yourself. My name is Christina. I have been, and that piece about connection. So making the connection, why are you doing this? Maybe someone suggested. So, Christopher suggested that I reach out to you and that we would benefit from getting to know one another. So you can kind of credential. Sometimes it helps to say who it is that suggested that you meet for a one-on-one. And then another piece is to, after you framed your time together and thank the person for meeting with you, just to begin with an open-ended question. And I've got a slide that has some suggestions for what some of those open-ended questions might be. And then again, to listen, to ask more questions that invite deeper sharing, and to be able to then share some of your own story when appropriate, which means that you yourself have spent the time to know your own story. And at Redeemer, we've developed a separate training that focuses on knowing your own story so that you know what to share appropriately and when. And then the concluding bit of a one-to-one meeting is really any next steps. You know, perhaps after listening to Ken, I think, oh, it would be really great for you to call Kristen, because you and Kristen have not yet had a one-on-one. So there's always a next step, or maybe it's a follow-up one-on-one. Well, wow, you know, 45-minute, or, you know, or I've got another appointment I need to get to, or I know you've got a funeral that you need to get to. Let's have a follow-up one-on-one.
I'd say too, and it's even the ask of the person that you have initiated the one-on-one with, to ask them, is there someone else you think I should talk to?
Yes.
It's a two-way street there. And that's
Yes,
also a way of
absolutely.
expanding that, that network of people that you are in relationship with.
Yeah, that's a really, really good one. Is there anyone that you think of that would be good for me to have a one-on-one? That's another really good one. Sounds like you've been doing this for a while.
No, but that's, God has that trail laid out for
It's
you.
true. Absolutely, absolutely. So to your point, what a relational meeting is not, it's not an interview. It is not recruiting for your altar guild or flower guild or vestry or fill in the blank. This is not the time.
Bring no hidden agendas.
It's not a gossip or small talk. Although I have to say, I am curious, the Ravens game there may be a little time for small talk when we practice our one-on-one. It's not therapy or counseling, and it's not pastoral care. And that last one can be a little tricky. Sometimes there's some overlap there, but for example, I have in my own scheduling made the difference just in terms of my calendar, in terms of my own intention. Am I meeting this person to get to know him or her or them better relationally, or is this really a pastoral meeting? Her mother just died, or I'd love to hear if you have anything more to add about that.
And that's difficult because there's that fine line, particularly with people in your own community, because you're seen as the priest and pastor, and sometimes to get them to move or focus in a different direction is difficult, because it's so easy to bring the pastoral concerns out at that time.
Yeah, and of course there are times when you realize you went into something intending a one-on-one, and then you realize, well, really, this is going to be a pastoral focus, and that's okay, right? But just to know that at least relational meetings are not pastoral care. So this is just to go back to where at least I encountered the relational meeting was through community organizing and my getting more and more involved with BUILD, Baltimoreans United, in leadership development. I'll just do a very brief community organizing 101 here, 101. That one-to-one meetings are really about building power, defined as the ability to act. And in our context, as followers of Jesus, we are all about shifting the world as it currently is closer to the world as it should be, right? Presiding Bishop Michael Curry talks about the nightmare that our world often is, and the dream that God has for our world, and Jesus's prayer, heaven on earth. So this is a practical, radical, meaning at the root, foundational, strategic tool to go about that work. And in the world that we live in order to have the power to act, we need to organize people and organize money. Without those two things, organized people and organized money, we can't act in the way that Jesus has showed for us to act.
Yeah, it's the power of love, basically, is what we're talking about.
It is.
And how that compels us, to this work. I'm going to slip back into social justice day from last Saturday, I'm afraid, but it is part of that. And this is our gospel mandate is to be out there serving the community and building whatever you want to call that, beloved community, the kingdom of God, the kingdom of love, the culture of love, and there's no escaping that. And it is through it's the power of these relational meetings that you do find a way of connecting, unifying people together to have, the power to create, the necessary change to bring about the kingdom.
And so this next slide, again, refers to this tool as being at the heart of anything else, is building these relationships and connecting. And these relationships, in terms of community organizing, are the ability to build these public relationships. And so I have a quick story about that. Our current campaign in Build with the city and the Greater Baltimore Committee, so the business community and the corporate community, is to finally tackle the decades-long crisis of vacant and abandoned houses in our city, and to reinvest in neighborhoods that have historically been disinvested in. And one of the key next steps that a number of Bill leaders have been trying to do is to get a face-to-face meeting with Senate President Bill Ferguson. Well, it was because a parishioner had a relationship with Senate President Bill Ferguson that we were able to get that face-to-face meeting with him. And that's just one example of how this can work, to just be able to pick up the phone or at a dinner meeting, be able to take that next step to be able to advance Jesus's agenda for our city. Relational meetings help to identify potential leaders. So that's another, I would say, secondary agenda in terms of how we're presenting it. But as community organizers, that is also part of the agenda, is whenever we are relating with someone in a new way, to have this question in our mind. And I would say as congregational leaders as well, is this person a potential leader? Is this someone who has a following, meaning when this person calls or wants to go to an event, will 20 other people follow that person? Or is this a leader that is a potential leader that I can continue to cultivate and develop? One-to-one meetings also help to surface new ideas, new ways of seeing a problem and addressing a problem. And as Ken said, it's really the way that we build and grow to be able to organize for action.
Yeah, and I'm going to tie the first and the last together. In my former parish, that was really the path that we followed as we reached out into the community. We found allies that really helped us focus more sharply on the missions that we found to be essential. At All Saints Sunderland, it was around the area of racial reconciliation. And through one-on-one meetings, the relationships that we were able to develop with the local branch of the NAACP, other groups, within the county that I like to say gave birth to the Trail of Souls back in 2004, 2005. And other things that were possible for that. Connections we made with the schools, one-on-one with, the teachers and counselors at the high schools in the area, helped us develop a student advocacy, program. We didn't have a traditional group meeting on Sunday night, youth group that did pizza and bowling, but we had over 100 kids that went to Annapolis each year to talk about the issues that were important to them on our Student Advocacy Day. And all of that came from connecting through the one-on-one relationships with leaders in the community and others in the community who shared that passion with us. Passions we identified through one-on-one meetings within the congregation itself.
Yeah, and I appreciate you using that. So much of what can happen, as you might imagine, through these one-on-ones is the more you have, the more you're able to identify the areas of common interest and passion. So that's another key piece of this, is it's being able to engage with someone one-on-one, that you find out what he or she or they really care about, and then where common interests and common passions lie, to be able to work on and act together. So that's a really key piece to this whole process. So here's some possible opening questions that what brought you here today? That's always, a good one. When we started really focusing on these one-to-one relational meetings at Redeemer, it was right around coming out of the throes of the pandemic. I know we're still in many ways in it, but when people were just starting to feel more comfortable gathering in public again, and people were inviting one another to have one-on-one meetings, that question, how has your life changed coming out of the pandemic? Another one, who is a role model for you growing up and why? Can you tell me a story about that person? And then the fourth example is a really good one too. If there's something that you could change in your community, what would it be and why? And what would you be energized to do around that issue? And to really let your own genuine curiosity lead you as to the follow-up questions after that open-ended question. I know we're getting, you and I want to.
We're going to have to rush through this.
Yeah, we're going to have to rush through this. So engage listening. Most of you are familiar with what it is to be really engaged as a listener, listening with your full self, and also to what's being communicated, not with words, but non-verbally. Asking questions, following your genuine curiosity, interrupting as appropriate and intentionally, to be able to dig deeper or to reframe, refocus, or say, you know what, I really, really would love to hear what you just mentioned, a couple of minutes ago. Let's go there, and to be fully present. And I mentioned how important it is to have taken the time to know your own story, so that you know what to share about your own story in an appropriate way to model vulnerability. And
yes, the 3 C's of relational meetings, and easy to remember, and this is like your guiding principles. Curiosity is the first thing. Being curious enough about another person to say that, I would really love to have a conversation with them. And part of that is being aware of what it is that you really want to know. And this, as you said, there are questions that can sort of guide you. But to really think about it beforehand and say, what is it that I really want to know? And to, again, be free enough to go where the conversation leads you. But that's part of curiosity as well, to follow that, which leads us to the next C, which is courage. And first, it's the courage to initiate the conversation in the first place, to go up to another and invite them into this sacred space. But it's also the courage to follow the trail that your curiosity is unfolding, and to not be afraid to probe a little deeper, to go a little deeper. Again, asking their permission to do that. And it's, and people love to talk about themselves, and they will share what they're willing to share. And again, this isn't therapy, but it's, it's having the courage to at least push that a little bit, to which leads us to the last C, which is clarity. Because it is through these conversations that, for both of you, both the person who has initiated the conversation and the person who is doing most of the sharing in this, that you want to come away with a little different context. You may have learned something about yourself during the process, and you're hoping that the person that you were talking with also has that moment of pause where they think, gosh, I never thought about myself in that particular way. And I'm going to add a fourth C here, and I know we've got to hurry, and it's a word we already mentioned, which is connection. And I warned you I was going to flip back to last Saturday. For those of you who were with us for Social Justice Day, we talked about Marshall Gantz and his whole idea of story and the power of story. And this is where this connection piece is so viable. He describes three aspects of story that build movement and build community. And the first is story of self, and we've talked about that. It's knowing our own story, and it's the curiosity to find out someone else's story. And when those two stories of self collide, what we find is created is a story of us. And this is where we make those connections, and we see our commonality. Perhaps it's a common passion that we share, but there is a story of us that evolves. And when we have this story of us that grows and this community that's forming around it, it's also easy for us to see what Gantz calls the story of now. And the story of now are those things, those obstacles, those issues that we are confronting that impact us and prevent us from living in the beloved community. So let's move.
All right, so we're going to take time now. We were going to try and do this in 20 minutes. We're going to now do it in about 10. But so Ken and I are going to and this is all none of this is rehearsed.
Unrehearsed, yes.
Unrehearsed, so this is a real deal.
I'm on pins and needles.
So Ken, I really, first of all, I want to thank you for saying yes to my invitation to team up with this, and to be totally transparent. Part of why I was excited to team up with you is because I really don't know a lot of your story. I mean, you and I have done karaoke together at clergy conference. I remember a few years ago, we were working together on with Vinnie DeMarco in Annapolis. But I really don't know how you got to be doing what you've been doing so well for so long. And so I'm curious, how did you, was there someone in your life who got you on this path, or what is the genesis of?
Yeah, I think there were several elements in that. And, someone in my life, there were certainly, my parents and my upbringing, I think was
Sure.
was a part of that.
Oh, wait a
Yes,
second.
we're coming off the small screen here.
Sorry.
Oh, there we are. There was certainly, an influence of my parents, but, and it's funny because I mentioned this in a sermon on Sunday. I talked about someone who really had an impact on me. And it was when I went to college, I was there as an engineering major. And, coming out of a little plug for Poly in Baltimore City, I saw that as my career path. I should explain too that, growing up, I was raised in a very fundamentalist, congregation.
And where did you grow up?
I grew up in the cusp between Hamilton and Warrenville.
Okay.
So I was right in that Belvedere, Eckerdale Avenue corridor. Shout out to Hamilton and Warrenville for that. But engineering, and I was in I took an elective in religion. And it was a critical study of the Synoptic Gospels. And again, coming out of a fundamentalist background, which I had largely rejected, and really was a part of the, I'd say that, spiritual and somehow still connected to that God spark, but certainly disillusioned by, how I'd come out of that. And to suddenly, with a critical eye, to read like the Gospel of Mark, and to think, oh my God, there is good news in here. And my immediate reaction was that I needed to go back and talk to this traumatized 7, 8, 9-year-old and tell them that, there is really love involved in this. It's not judgment, it's not threat. And there was something about that, for me, that was one of those, Sea of Galilee moments.
Yeah.
But how I got into this too, and that gets back into my own childhood. I mentioned growing up where I did. I think I was fortunate because I was in a neighborhood where we were already, in a sense, segregated. This is the 50s, and my elementary school. But there were two events I remember. The first being the Northwood Theater, and for those of you who know Northwood and the stories about it and how it was difficult with Morgan there, segregating some of or desegregating some of the businesses. And I remember as a kid going to see a Walt Disney movie. It's probably like 58 or 59. It might have been Flubber or one of those films.
Flubber?
Walt Disney. I'll tell you about it later.
Okay.
But to go there, and there were Morgan students who were picketing out in front of us. And again, one of those vivid memories. And, seeing them, I mean, they were dressed to the nines, as we'd say, and carrying these signs. And going in for the film and just being mesmerized by this and not quite understanding what was going on, but knowing that something was really out of place. And then move forward a couple of years, we lost our house in Hamilton. My dad had suffered a nervous breakdown and had made, because of an aunt and uncle that lived with us, there were some, poor financial decisions that were made. And we were basically, not evicted, we weren't paying rent, but we lost the house. And for a couple of months, we were literally homeless and lived with an aunt, that had taken us in. And again, with this whole thing where I have my Sea of Galilee moment, this is all part of that. And I realized that, that's that fundamentalist, brainwashing, but also the way we are raised to think, well, this is the greatest country in the world, this, that, and the other. And I thought to myself, how can it be that if a portion of its citizens aren't allowed to go see a Walt Disney movie, where somebody like my dad and our family could be thrown out of their house? There's something really wrong here.
Yes.
And I think that's what really, opened my eyes to, the fact that we need to address this, we need to embrace this, and we need to change this.
I so appreciate you sharing I've known you for 13, 14 years and did not know that. And it totally, completely helps to fill out. Now I understand the root. I've always respected you and always admired you and your passion, and I understand it more now.
And I'm driven by that. It's like no one should have to suffer from all this guilt. No one should have to suffer from these conditions.
And I I appreciate you going deep that way, and I can share with you part of, I think, my own story, and going deep into my own story has been realizing that agency, right? The ability to know that you have power in your life is something that, my parents were immigrants from the Philippines, and the Marcos dictatorship in the early 70s impacted my childhood, and that abuse of power. And so I think that's part of what drives me. And what I hear in your story is this realization, first of all, it's not supposed to be this way. And then being able to act, to change, to have agency in your life. So, part of what drives me is that sense of agency.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's an abuse of everything that you've shared is talking about the way that the system has abused power, right?
And let's talk about influences in my life. Another one, Kingsley Smith, who no longer with us, but long time the rector at Trinity in Towson. I got to know him through a weekly Bible study, and he introduced me to Renee Girard, who really kind of changed my thinking, about just how we approach this. And I've identified for myself, that question somebody asked me once. Sorry to jump around like that. Too much caffeine. But they said, if you had to boil it down, what is the message of the Bible? And I had to think about that. And I came back to them and I said, I think it's two things. I think there are two trajectories. The Bible is just a story of our evolution. And it's a story of our progression. Mm-hmm. And it's a progression from, the first creation story, from that, theology of scarcity to one of abundance.
Yes.
Where we're no longer, fearful and we can open up. But the other was the trajectory that moved us from violence to nonviolence.
Yes.
And that's another thing that propels me now, is that, we are so steeped in that.
Yes.
This righteous violence, this sacred violence, and even our own, religion based on this sacrificial model.
Yes.
That we just need to divorce ourselves from that, and move. We got to move the needle in some way.
Yes. Amen. Amen. Well, thank you. We went deep, real fast.
Real quick.
But
I've been doing this.
Well, yeah.
I know my story.
Yes, of course. But I appreciate you being willing to share it with me and share it with everyone who's being present with us.
Well, thank you for asking. Thank you for asking me.
Of course.
I've always been a fan. So.
Well, so I'm going to just pause and I'm going to take 3 deep breaths before we transition on together. So I'll take a nice deep breath in and exhale. Another breath in and release. And a third breath together. Inhale and exhale. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. So I'm going to attempt to share the screen one more time. And just transition us to our next part. By the way, that photograph here of those 2 women, just to your point about the violence in our world, that is a Palestinian woman and an Israeli woman, recent in the last few months, having a one-on-one. Just a final food for thought. Do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justly now. Love mercy now. Walk humbly now. We are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are we free to abandon it. And this tool of the one-on-one is a radical foundational to be able to not abandon the work. So now is a time to try what Ken and I just modeled for a few minutes and what we've been talking about. And so for the next, let's see, what's the agenda here?
12:50 is when we'll reconvene to have the moderators share back what that experience was like.
And I would add, give us a call. Geez, I do house calls. I'm happy to come out and talk to your vestry, talk to your membership about,
Absolutely.
About one-on-ones.
Absolutely.
And I'll volunteer Christina and the rest of the staff.
And so at this time, while you're eating lunch, the opportunity is to, if you can, practice 2 relational meetings, about 30 minutes each, and just find someone in the room who you would like to get to know better, and hopefully you'll be able to engage with 2 different people over the course of the next period. Thanks so much.
Yes, thank you. And thank you.
Thank you.
Just a quick interruption. We are at 12:15. This is about the halfway marker in our relational one-to-one meeting practicum. So if you have not already found another person to spend some time with, we'd like to challenge you to do that. I know some people gravitate toward these naturally, and it's just a part of who you are and how you relate and connect with folks. And others, let's confess, others of us struggle with doing these. So this is a practice. It's something that takes time to do. And so part of today's intention is to give you some space to practice. So if you could start to disengage from the person you're meeting with and prepare to meet with another human being. The other thing that I'd say is that when you're gathering, if possible, really try to focus on one other person. So I know the temptation could be that we're going to do this in a small group instead. It is not the same, I assure you. So while it might be a stretch to feel like you're going to find one other person, might feel like you're back in middle school, like, am I going to get picked? Please just trust in the process. See if you can find another person to meet with, and enjoy that time together to go a little deeper as you eat and commune together. So you'll hear another interruption from me at 12:45, and at that point we're gonna we'll ask the moderators to start to gather folks back together and start to fill up the chat and Q&A feature of the webinar with things that that people learned and experienced during their time doing these one-to-ones. So thank you, and we'll see you in about 30 minutes.
Right. Welcome back. It's Ken and Christina again here to bring us home for the last 10 minutes of this module. Hope that you all have had a good lunch and nourishing conversation and engagement with one another, as well as good food. So I'm kind of a novice at this whole thing, so bear with me, but I've got lots of chats coming in.
And I was going to just throw in, as Christina's looking at that, I hope you were aware of the energy that was being generated by the conversation that you had, just the power in sharing those stories. Again, where, that's that courage coming through, that's that connection, that's the story of self, connecting to make those stories of us. And just in the little thing that we did, I hope that demonstrated for you just how much, power can be generated, through those connections.
And I know that you wanted to relay where we might have gone with, we only had 10 minutes. So,
we did. And we were just getting into, I think, the more interesting pieces that we may have developed. There were questions I know that you could have followed through with and gone a little further with. I had much more story that I wanted to share. Again, triggered by the questions you were asking, so I think to have been able to do a 35 or 45 minute model that, I think you would have seen just where this conversation may have gone, and just how effective and impactful it would have been in that quest to to really learn another person and to know that person. The other thing too that we didn't get a chance to explore at the end, and to reinforce what we had said earlier, is that it's a great opportunity at the end of that to actually ask, where, who is there anybody else that you think I should be talking to, or to have them, relate to you, or even you to say, hey, thank you for talking to me. I really think you should connect with, do a one-on-one with, so-and-so. Because again, it's that knowledge that you receive, that clarity, that, you can then direct. And again, it's all about those connections. I mean, it all boils down to it's relationship. It's all about relationship.
And so a lot of the chat and the comments, for those of you who don't have access and can't see the comments that are coming in, there's a lot of, this is very helpful, allowing relationships to deepen, learning things that we wouldn't otherwise know about one another, even if we've lived in the same city for a long time, learning personal information we otherwise wouldn't have known, discovery of a larger shared history. You really have to learn how to listen and listen without trying to problem solve. So that can be harder for some of us than others, right? To simply listen and be present. And it's not about trying to fix anything that's been shared. Want to know what my opening question is going to be. Right, so that's we've suggested some helpful ones, who was someone growing up that was a role model, and that can lead to some deep sharing. What could you change in your community if there's one thing? So that's as Ken, I know that you have said this is something that takes a few minutes to learn, but a lifetime to master. And some of that is figuring out what are the opening questions that work well. Yeah.
I seem to rely a lot on where were you from, and what do you remember most about growing up? What stood out? I also like a variation on the one question, like what brought you here this morning, is like, why did you say yes to my invitation to talk to you?
Yeah, that's another good one. Oh, here's something that's interesting. Knowing when to jump in when you have something similar. So I want to linger on that for just a little bit. It's a fine line between really listening and as an initiator, and then sharing to also model vulnerability, which is a good practice to have, versus, I would say, what typically happens with more day-to-day conversations. Like, I have a son who goes to so-and-so. Well, I have a son, I went to this school, so I went to that school too. Like, that's not, we're not trying to match for match. It's, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think it's also a way of encouraging a deeper conversation. In the conversation we modeled, we very quickly got to a much deeper level. And we could, Christina was able to share with me, where I had connected with her. And that really opened the door for me to go even deeper in our conversation.
Yeah. And I did that intentionally because I was aware that Ken had been very vulnerable and shared something very, talk about sacred space. And as an initiator, when that sacred skin, when you feel that energy shift, this is soul territory that we are embarking in, to also be mindful of your own willingness to share as appropriate, so that it's not an interview, and it's there's an exchange of souls as opposed to just focusing on one. You know what I mean? Yeah. I felt like I hope it was the right call to meet you where you had taken us, but.
And that's also part of the clarity issue that we talked about, and why this is a lifetime to master, because it's also being aware of what feelings is this stirring in you as you're talking with this other person.
Yeah.
And sometimes there are things that you may realize about yourself, gosh, that I really need to change this, or I need to work on this.
Yeah.
So it's there should be something that comes out of this for both, the person who has been the invitee and the
absolutely, that it's mutually transforming.
Yep.
So we had Ken, the timbre of your voice makes it a little, so let's see, closed captioning. I'm not sure what to do with that at the moment, because I'm not
either, but it's been recorded. Turn it up when you
let's see, hard to do without empathy and humility. Absolutely. Let's see, from St. Peter's, Ellicott City, these meetings are a great way to build community between two people. It was easier than we thought, though hard to get started for some of us. Second conversation went easier than the first. We liked changing people, but thought that shifting who was the initiator. Right, the conversation helps us learn more, but also open doors for future conversations. Absolutely. And that makes me also think about something else that we were debriefing on in the room, is that clearly for some, this is easier than others. We were remarking that perhaps as we invited people to begin to share and practice these, for some it was All right, let's do it. And others, I'm going to take an extended bathroom break and not come back for another hour. And that is just the way that we are, right? This is really harder for some of us. And so one of the things that Ken said, and Christopher, it really takes courage. It takes practice. They do get easier the more that you do them, and maybe to approach this as a skill that we are all engaged in order to be to empower us to do what Jesus is asking us to do, which is really to build the beloved community through relationship and the willingness to take risks, even if that is to be willing to say yes to going a little deeper than we're comfortable with. I don't know if you've, yeah.
Yeah, no,
So I think any questions in the Q&A? I don't see any.
I think our work is done.
I think our work is done.
If it's okay for me to pop into the screen
Oh,
with you all,
please.
I said earlier, the thorn between the roses. So I saw in the chat there that Mario said out at St. George's that there was let's see here. Some found it quite helpful and learned more about each other. Plans were made to continue ongoing one-to-one conversations with each other, which is, I think that's if there's no other takeaway, it's that, just that this is for some of you, this is the first time you're trying this as a tool, but there is strategy that can form from this. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the implementation phase of this. So
Yep.
Christina and Ken, thank you so much for sharing this gift
Thank
with
you.
us and the diocese. And we're going to take a 15-minute break now. Please come back at 1:15 because up next is Sue Ellen Spots and Dina Van Claveren. So we are looking forward to that next module. And again, thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Each time I see a presentation or see a training that offers these relational one-to-one meetings, as Christina and Ken did, I learned something new about myself and about the practice of it. And I've been working doing these relational meetings and pretty committed to it. And each time I still learn something new. So I hope you got something as well, and that you'll put it to practice as you work at that in your own ministry context. Our next presentation are a lay leader and a clergy person. Sue Ellen Spots is a director for evangelical mission in the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America. She serves in 2 synods in Pennsylvania, just north of the diocese. But we got to know Sue Ellen here when she was a member of the Vestry at St. John's in Hagerstown, and that she served for a couple of years on the Congregational Vitality Committee for the diocese. She's also worked as a consultant on that committee, as well as in close collaboration with an organization called FaithX that the diocese is partnered with on our Vitality Improvement Program. So Sue Ellen is joined by Canon Dina Van Claveren, who is new to our diocesan staff, the Canon for Development and Stewardship. Dina served in a ministry context at St. Andrew's and St. Paul's in Western Howard County, and has been a priest in the diocese for probably close to 2 decades now. So I hope that you really enjoy the work that they're going to present on as they talk about a resource that FaithX has developed called the Neighborhood Insight Report. It shares demographic information in a way that can really help you as a leader in your congregation to know what's going on in your wider community, demographic changes that are occurring, and just, I think it's really helpful to have some of this data because we oftentimes make assumptions about who lives in the community surrounding where our congregation gathers for worship. So these demographics can be really useful as you're trying to build those relationships and connect in a deep way. I hope you enjoy. Well, I hope you're having a good day. I know I am, and I feel like I'm learning a lot, and just really glad to be with you all, thinking and praying and exploring what God is calling us to in this. So our third module, you got this introduction at the start, but Sue Ellen Spots and Dina Van Claveren were not with us yet when I went through all of their a little bit of their bio, not all of their bio, but. Here in Sue Ellen and Dina, you have folks that have been deeply invested in numerous congregations, providing congregational development support. And in their module, they're going to talk about a tool that was developed by an organization called FaithX. And the Diocese of Maryland has been a core partner with FaithX. And they have created a platform called MapDash. And out of MapDash, this demographic tool to help us as congregational leaders to understand more about the communities that we're situated in, to question the assumptions we make and gather vital information that helps us to connect in wider and wider circles. So they're going to focus in particular on a tool that MapDash shares that's called the Neighborhood Insight Report. And as you heard me say earlier, Sue Ellen is on staff of 2 synods in Pennsylvania, working as director of evangelical mission. And you also likely recall that Dina Van Claveren is our new canon for development and stewardship, or stewardship and development. And so glad to have them both here present for this. And so I'm going to stop talking now and turn things over to Sue Ellen and Dina to share about the work that they've been doing.
Thank you. We are glad to be here. Canon Dina, did you have any introductory remarks you wanted to make? Otherwise, I think I can lay out what we're going to do.
Sure. Well, another piece to add to this is I was listening to Ken and Christina sharing about one-on-one relational meetings before the break. I was thinking about the power of revelation in community and how much is revealed when we sit and talk to one another and connect so deeply. And in a way, Sue Ellen, this is really what this work is about. It's revelation. It's sitting with data, which is maybe more charming for some of us and less charming for others. It's really looking for that same revelatory experience where we can know that context for mission better. So I'm excited to be a part of this time of revealing, and I'm glad to work with you, Sue Ellen.
Great. So without further ado, I think what I'd like for us to do is take a look here. At what it is we're going to do, and outline, give a little context to what we're going to do. And what I think is really important is to remember that this Neighborhood Insight Report is only a tool. And it's a tool that can help us and give some framework for developing our mission. So the lens through which we're going to look at this Neighborhood Insight Report is that of our identity as God's people, claimed in the waters of baptism and formed by the teachings of the apostles and the fellowship of the community. There's a lot of data that we're going to be able to access. But the data are mission tools as long as we use them in service to mission and not make ourselves servants of the data, but let the data serve our mission. So what is it to be God's people in the world? Well, when asked, we know the answer to that. It is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and to love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater, is how Mark writes it. And then my favorite part is in Luke, where the lawyer who's there says, okay, but who is my neighbor? And that's really where we are. Who is our neighbor? And in the story that followed in Luke, the story explaining who my neighbor is, the story that Jesus tells about the Good Samaritan totally upends the concept of who is my neighbor and catches everybody off guard. And so this is what we're going to do. This is the purpose of reading the Neighborhood Insight Report, is to see how it upends our understanding of who our neighbor is. And so as you read it, as we go through it, and as you take time to read yours later on, I want you to be curious, to ask questions, to use it as a way to check your assumptions of who your neighbor is, and see what other ways you can discover things about your neighbor and your neighborhood. Take a look at what are the boundaries that are listed, and what do you consider the boundaries of your neighborhood? Who lives there? Who works there? How would you describe the basic characteristics, either through your lived experience, but also through what you learned from the data? And how do you as a congregation relate to your neighborhood? The insights that are gained by this will help you. The insights gained from looking at your report will help you to develop your mission. They'll help you to proclaim God by example, the good news of Christ, to figure out how to seek and serve Christ in all persons, and to find ways to strive for justice and peace and respect the dignity of all in your neighborhood. In other words, the data can help us to figure out how to live out our baptism. So let's take a look. If what you are looking at, there are two ways that you can get it. You can print this off and have a hard copy, which will be static. But when we look at it online, we will be able to, digitally, we'll be able to get into it and dig down and really uncover a little extra data. So I'm going to now share the Neighborhood Insight Report for one of the communities in our diocese. And can you all see this? Or make sure in flipping that I got to the right place. So, and if you have some comments, please feel free to share, okay? And I'm realizing that you didn't get the screen share before, so I apologize.
And Sue Ellen, I'll watch the chat for you if you want to talk through it.
Thank you.
You bet.
Right. So here we're going to take a look at, this is the Neighborhood Insight Report for Trinity in Towson. So the first thing you'll see is that you'll get a little map here. And this map up here, it will tell you this is your 5-minute drive time. So Trinity Towson would be in the middle. And if you want to get a closer look, then when you're digitally, you can zoom in to see which streets there are and get a sense and really look at that. And then you can zoom out to see where exactly they drew those boundaries. So you can work at it that way and play with it and really see how it's defined at that point. The other thing that you can do is look at, you want to take a look at what do the boundaries of this 5-minute drive time. There's nothing sacred about this. This is just a reference point for you. So a first question you can ask yourself is this how we define our neighborhood? Are these, and by neighborhood, how does it compare to where our members live? Is there a difference? Do we pull from people right here in this neighborhood, or do we come from different directions? And then you dig down and ask further questions. What does that mean then for the way we do ministry? Another thing that as you look at these boundaries, you can look at what are some natural boundaries, what are artificial boundaries, what are things that cut through here that might create a different kind of boundary within this 5-minute drive time. What does it mean to have a highway running through or a river? And what do you know about the different neighborhoods within your 5-minute drive neighborhood? So lots of questions you can ask yourself. This is just a starting point that asks, okay, 5 minutes from us, what can we do if we're driving? And then we can look up here and see what the total population of our current year is in this period. How many people live here? What ages are they? And we can see all the different generations. We can also see how many different households. So we've got number of people, but also number of households. And here's an interesting one, is the population growth projected. How much does it seem like our neighborhood is going to grow in this area? So when we talk, and we often, talk about that in terms of the church, we need to get more people. Well, if more people aren't growing there, what are other ways we grow? But how static is the population in our neighborhood? Learning about the average household size and the average household income. And then we can, when you're online on the digital, you can click on that and you can see some more, well, we're not going to see that one because my system is going to be too slow, I think. You can sit here and see in the population growth what that has been, how it's changed over the years. Here was a spike. We might still be living off of this spike from 2020 to 2022 and feeling a growth, but then realize that the projected growth over the next 5 years is much less than we may have experienced it recently. So to be able to understand that what our lived experience of the past couple years may not be what we will live and experience in the next couple years. We can have race and ethnicity, and if we can explore a little bit more of what that is, and it tells us age by sex, by race. It tells us gender. Well, it doesn't. So this would be a first critical question when we talk about respecting the dignity of all and being aware of justice issues. If we are only looking at male and female by sex, we are not tuned into gender identity and expanded ideas of gender identity that we might want to be aware of in our community. Do we have people who are non-binary? Do we have trans people? Are there communities of people in our neighborhood that don't fall into some of the categories that are here, even though they do? That's sort of not a real clear way to say that, but we can break out here the different ethnicities. We can look at lifestyles, and all of these, when you drill down on them, are defined for you. So then if we go to the next page, the backside of this will show us some other things about our neighborhood. How many schools are in our neighborhood? And it tells us exactly which ones they are, where they are from us, how far they are. So we can see maybe there are some schools that we didn't realize were in our neighborhood. We can look at the daytime population in our neighborhood. How many people that are there during the day are workers, and how many are people who live there, and what's that breakdown of percentage? We look at households with disability, the crime index. When we talk about the crime index, that can explore for us what type of crime are we talking about, and how does that affect the people who live in our community? What is their lived experience? What does that mean for what kind of place our church is in the midst of that? And there's a lot of difference if that crime is robberies versus murders versus rape, what does that tell us about things we need to be aware of and questions that the people around us might be asking, or what their lived experience is? Another one that is always really helpful is our lived experience, the religiously unaffiliated. And in all of these, they give you what it is for your neighborhood as well as the national average. So we can look, so all of these are different categories of things we can look at and ask questions about how they affect the character of our neighborhood and what information they tell us about opportunities for ministry. And then the other option is to look at a 15-minute drive time, and it's the same information, only you see it from 15 minutes out by driving. And the other thing to keep in mind as you're looking at these is context. So 15 minutes in Center City, Baltimore, 15-minute drive time could be worlds and worlds away. And you may not even want to be looking that far out in terms of seeing your mission. However, if you're out in Washington County, a 15-minute drive time may be critical to your reach. The other thing, if when you're looking at that, drive time is really sort of not a good reference for you if you are in the inner city and you want to see what's really a walking time because you have a mission to be on the ground in your neighborhood. You can ask for those settings to be adjusted so you can get a 15-minute walk time to really see if what you want to do is be boots on the ground walking your neighborhood, what that would look like. So these things can be adjusted. If you can't do them in the settings, you can ask and we can request that. So that's sort of an overall view of what you can learn from here. Questions to ask of what's not there is, what is around the outside of these boundaries that impinges on your neighborhood? How does that affect it? And also the other thing is you can get an overlay of where are the communities of faith, the houses of faith in your territory, in your neighborhood, who else is there? And where are the different churches? How close are you to other Episcopal churches and churches or temples or mosques, houses of other faith traditions? So with that, what I want to do is turn it over to Canon Dina, who's going to share how she has been working, has taken this information and really used it and applied it. So Dina?
Thank you, Sue Ellen. That was a great introduction to how to access that. I'm going to stop watching the Q&A. And would you mind, Sue Ellen, popping however folks link to this information? I also need that. Is there a live link that we can all use to find our own information, or is there a secret password to it? Oh, I can't hear you. You're muted. There you go.
At this time, there's not direct, we can't give everyone direct, but you can request that of Canon Christopher, and we'll be able to get that for you. Yeah.
Good to know.
Yeah, and there was a question about why 5 minutes, and that's just, why a 5-minute drive time and a 15-minute drive time. Those were just sort of standard that the project chooses as sort of a territory. You can choose, as I said, to redefine that, but it's a good baseline to say, wow, that's too much, or we want to focus, and then you can pull that in.
Great. Well, friends, some of you know that I've only been serving as the Canon for Development and Stewardship for 2 weeks. Before that, I was rector of St. Andrew's Glenwood and priest in partnership at St. Paul's Poplar Springs. And I came across Mapdash with Mary Sue LaRude and the wardens of each congregation as we were seeking how to take our mission and meet the context for our mission with more data, with more information. And so the information that Sue Ellen just walked us through is very similar to what I looked at with Mary Sulerud about 2 years ago and the senior warden of St. Paul's, and actually another person who's working on welcoming at St. Paul's, Dick Wiltshire. So Dick Wiltshire and Mary Sulerud and I sat down with a couple of these information pieces and infographics, and it was incredibly revelatory. I want to tell you why and how. And I'll show you, I'm not going to show you that map dash because I want to show you what came out of it instead. We could look at the map dash for St. Paul's, but I want you to see what it produced more than how we played in it. So we got into the map dash, and because I had already been looking at the map dash infographics for St. Andrews, I had this compare contrast experience. Suddenly I saw that these two communities, about 5 miles or 8 minutes drive time apart, had really distinctive contexts. And I already knew instinctively or intuitively that they had very different charisms or gifts to offer the world based on their size, their buildings, the things that they loved about their community and offered to the community. I couldn't quite put my finger on how that all came together. And as we worked through the map dash, we saw that St. Paul's Poplar Springs has a much higher number when it came to households with disabilities. It was much higher than the national average for that number. And we dove into that infographic a bit more and found out more. It made us ask a lot of questions as leaders at St. Paul's. Why? Why does this area have more households that indicate they have a member with a disability? Meanwhile, I'm also noticing they have 2 ramps on their small building, one for the front door, one for the back door, one that's old and one that's very new. And they clearly have been committed to issues of access in the community. And I also observed in my own heart and personal experience that my octogenarian parents had moved into our basement. We converted it into a cottage. And suddenly I was much more aware of how difficult it was to move around in the world when your 80-something-year-old father is using a walker. And I was more open to how different and unique that was. And then the map dash data said, this is your community. We talked and prayed about it, and we noticed that we have a lot of ranch houses in that part of Howard County, whereas at St. Andrews Glenwood, you have many more colonials, homes with stairs. And so we thought maybe just the type of housing was part of the reason. We also know that the public schools in Howard County are very good for students with special needs, disabilities, IEPs, and there were a lot of resources for families around that. So we knew that we had a real particular opportunity because we have the ramps, because we already had open hearts to folks that learn differently, move differently, that this would be an area for us to focus on in our reaching out to neighbors in love and meeting the needs of our neighbors. As Sue Ellen said, love your neighbor as yourself. And when we found out our neighbor had more alignment with mobility issues and disability needs, we focused on that. So I'm going to screen share what came out of that discernment work and revelation, if I can here. Okay, it's a new computer, so let's just see what I can pop up. It's on my desktop, hang on. Okay. I am not seeing it, so what I'm going to do instead of wasting too much time looking for it is pop it into the chat. I think that might work better. And so I'm going to open up the chat and maybe you can click on it there from wherever you are. It's a pretty image rich, oh no, that's not the chat, that's the Q&A. It's a very image rich piece that I want to show you the images that came out of this at St. Paul's. Okay, so if you can find, if anyone is working behind the scenes and can figure out how to screen share that, bless you. I just don't want to take too much time on it. So that image Thank you. Jason's going to work on that behind the scenes. The image that's going to come up in just a moment when Jason works his magic is going to identify two key purposes or goals for St. Paul's for a 2-year time frame. Before the pandemic, as a leader of congregations, I thought about 5 and 10-year plans. After the pandemic, I think about 12 to 24 months is the time frame I can think about with leaders that we seem to have capacity for. Thank you so much, Jason. So what you see at the top left is the day of discovery work that we did to come up with these 2 priorities for 2 years. One of those priorities was to steward the resources of the congregation well, and the other is to welcome neighbors and grow Sunday participation. So Jason, if it's possible, I don't know if folks can see that there is, let me make this bigger. There is something with flowers on it that says a special spring market day. That is a flyer that shows our special effort to reach out in love to the neighbors in our community that have special needs. Oh, this is looking better and better, Jason. Thank you so much. So that special spring market day poster really is the culmination of a lot of discernment work that came out of MapDash, understanding that many of our neighbors were persons or households with disabilities. Dick Wiltshire had this great idea based on him being out in the community so much. That's the kind of person he is. He was at the farmer's market and met a young woman named Kelly. You can see her with her hand up. She's standing on a red square there in the parking lot trying to win a cake. And Kelly makes bath bombs and spa bath products and sells them at the Mount Airy Farmers Market. So we started there and we asked Kelly and their network of friends as a family to share their contacts and bring their goods and sell them at a special spring market day. We had folks that had paintings to sell, the bath products. We had folks that had food and t-shirts. We had a silent auction that we also put on, and scouting organizations helped with concessions. The Cedar Lane School in Columbia, their greenhouse came out with those families and they sold seedlings. That's a special education program in Howard County. We had lots of games and lots of fun, as you can see. And so all of this was to raise funds for Special Olympics, knowing that that would have some traction in the community with our folks who lived right around us. We spent about $2,000 to send out a postcard to everyone in that MapDash circle. We did it by zip code, so it was pretty close. Zip code postal routes, trying to reach those families that have someone in the home and to say to them, this is a community where you can come and not only be a vendor and be welcomed in that way to share gifts. This is a community where you can come anytime and be who you are and how God made you in this place, warmly welcomed. So that is something I want to share with folks as a direct outcome of one piece of data that grabbed our hearts and synced with other revelatory pieces of information that we were already noticing. And I also want to point out, so you can see there in one picture, this really ties into stewardship for me. Maybe everything ties into stewardship for me, which is possible. But by doing this day in May, when we did the postcard, we had to pay for pictures to show the community what we were dreaming of, because we didn't have those pictures ourselves. Once we had the event in May with over 100 people that came on site that we had never met before, brand new to the congregation, we then had our own images of what community and what our version of community felt like. Lots of folks came with young children because they want those children to be raised around a community and in a supportive way in that environment where we care about our neighbors with disabilities. And so it really had traction for young parents as well. You can ignore the other pictures down at the bottom that have some construction pieces going on. That's a bit more of reaching out in love to our Afghan refugee neighbors, and just happens to be on the same slide. Here's the stewardship piece. Once we could tell the story in our own words and relay what happened, how exciting it was to be together for the special spring market day, once we had images from that, there was a kind of momentum about our identity and how God was using us in a particular place that made inviting people to be generous in the fall when we did the stewardship campaign at St. Paul's. It made that much more natural, and it made it very exciting. We knew something more about why we are here and why we need to remain here. We felt very fueled by the mission. And so I do want to share with you that the stewardship campaign was their most successful stewardship campaign in 22 years. That's how long the treasurer has been there. So that's how much data we have. And we know that they've got their first balanced budget at St. Paul's, thanks be to God, in those 22 years. It's much easier to ask people to be a part of something that aligns with their values and has images that match what the dream of God is for a particular community. And I attribute the whole Special Spring Market Day to MapDash and that one piece of data we had not ever paid attention to or thought about. Thank you, Jason, for sharing the image. That was very helpful. You're on mute, Sue Ellen.
Of course I am.
There you go.
So thank you so much. And I think, thank you for sharing the story, because the stories of how we all interpret our mission in our place can be inspiring and help those in another place to see the potential. Like you said, it's not taking all of that information. There are so many little blocks of information that are available to us, and we can't be everything, but listening to the one that speaks to you and drilling down is so important. And so what we want to do now is give you a chance to practice some of this. And so, as I understand it, each of you has at your site you have a neighborhood insight report. So you don't have all of them. And so what we want to do is I want you to take a look at the neighborhood insight report that you have. And here are some guiding questions, and we will leave these on the screen for you. But again, you're not picking at everything, but take a look at the broad picture. What is a new or surprising insight? And you can take, the 5, the 15, both of them, flip them around, look at them, however you want to do it. What is a new or surprising insight for you? What are you curious about now that you see it? What questions does this prompt for you? And then really digging into what it means to be the church in the midst of that community. What good news needs to be heard or experienced somewhere in that place? What issues of justice or dignity might exist? And who is the neighbor who needs to experience Christ's love through you as a congregation? So we're going to give you about 25 or 30 minutes. We'll come back at 2:05. Yeah, 2:05. My math is really, really off today. We'll come back so that we have about 10 minutes to sort of process what you've had and maybe some other questions that it evokes for you about how to do it. Okay, there are some people who say they do not have a neighborhood insight report.
What I can do, I know I have at least 3 of them here on my computer that I can pop into, or do folks have them locally on the site?
Well, that's what these are some people who are saying they did not get a neighborhood insight report. I was under the impression that everybody received
Tell me
one. So,
can you all hear me?
We can. Hi, Christopher.
Good. Hi. So and forgive. So because Sue Ellen and Dina were engaging later in the day, so the plan was that everyone at the Vestry Vitality Day would have one neighborhood insight report, we're all working from the same one. And so we're working now to get that in front of folks. That is for the Cathedral of the Incarnation. There is no need that any site has one. The plan was to put it up on the screen so you had a chance to look at it, because we were trying to plan through the logistics of what it would look like to expect each of the host sites to print them out, for example. So we ran out of time. So we are working to, so we're,
Great.
so that's
Can I
that.
add a
So
little
for
more?
those,
Yep.
for those that are confused and wondering why we don't have a report on site, it's because we're going to be able to put that on the screen for you. So Jason's working to make sure that's there. What the other alternative is that Sue Ellen has in her slide some great questions there. So I believe those are still visible. So you might take a picture of that, and then so when you're on site, you take a picture of that, and then you have that within your on-site discussions, and then we can use the screen during that time to project the images, because it's a 2-page infographic for the cathedral. So sorry that we didn't have those logistics figured out as clearly as we do now, but that's where we are. So
Thank you, Canon Christopher. And I added a couple of other samples just so that if you want to try looking and comparing, because I think it is fascinating. Now that you've looked at Towson, you'll look at the cathedral and you'll say, oh, that's just like Towson in these 3 ways. But wow, this one piece is really different from what you remembered. So it is interesting when we know our community so well. We can't see those things. We need a piece of data to either confirm something we've been, suspecting, or to reveal it to us. So I think it's really fun to do a little comparing and contrasting.
And I find these reports really good also for checking our assumptions. We assume sometimes we've lived in a place so long, we haven't noticed how it has changed. So we have an idea in our minds of what our church should be, how it should reach out to people and we are missing so many opportunities for ministry by not looking at who's really there, who's there during the day, who's not there. And so there are a lot of different ways and I think this is where it's a lot of information, but it's good to ask the questions and then sit with it a while and pray with it to see what speaks to you and or how the Spirit is calling you into that place. So
the other piece I would add, just for those of you that do formation work, it was very useful to us, and it was our intern at the time. She's a member of Christ Church Columbia, Rebecca Warlow, who suggested that during Lent, we study disability issues. And we selected Jennifer Grimelli, the associate rector at St. Andrews and St. Paul's, selected a book for us to read and study so that we could become more comfortable with language and bodies that use space and move through space differently. And we had some really powerful conversations and learning about that aspect of our neighborhood that we thought we have some gifts around this. What can we do to enhance that and be really receptive to any neighbors who come to us in any way for community?
So I really thank you, Canon Dina and Sue Ellen, for just keeping the conversation going here. So our amazing tech team has been working furiously to make sure we get this figured out. So we're going to share the slide in just a minute. So if you haven't grabbed a picture, then our
I could put those questions I will put in the chat so that you have them.
The problem is that if you so when things go in the chat, we lose them because it's not everyone is logged on to their computer. So so we're relying on the screen. This is some of the webinar technology limitations that's different than like a straight up Zoom call. So yeah, we're working through those. So hopefully everybody sees that. So you might have to move a lot closer to take a look at it. A good learning for when we do this next time is we'll have a different approach. The last thing that I'm going to say about this is that this practicum is meant to help you. So the presentations that Sue Ellen and Canadina offered were meant to give you a snapshot of what a neighborhood insight report looks like, and then some ways that you might use that. And then as part of the follow-up tools that you're going to receive, everyone that's participating will get a link to your particular neighborhood insight report for your congregation. So those will be forthcoming after the fact. So again, Cathedral of the Incarnation will be the focus of this time. And so we're going to have you spend some time on site until 2:20. So you'll have about 20 minutes to just spend some time looking at that and gathering information, and then we'll invite the moderators to gather some of the learnings you might have over that 20-minute time that you want to share back with the group.
And did you say you are not able to make it any larger? Because there was a question that it's really hard for people to see it.
Yeah, I wish we could. You can take a picture of it, so that if you have technology that enables you to do that. So again, this is some of the real-time learning we have. I know from where I'm sitting, I can see it without my glasses on, but I can't see it as clearly as I'd like to. So you're going to break up now, and so you can come up and stand around and grab a picture so you can look more closely. And the learning for next time is that we'll make sure that folks have on-site copies of these that they can look at to go a little bit more in depth. And we're going to come back again at 2:20, so in 20 minutes.
I'm going to ask that everybody sort of head back and gather back around. We don't have a good way to have a conversation, and you know that already, but we're gonna take some questions, either questions that you have, and you can put them in the chat or in the question and answer, but we can take a look here at maybe some things you've learned or some other questions that this prompts. I have a question here about do we have the unemployment rate? And I'm trying to see. I thought that was on there, but I guess not. So that would be a really good question. It's also really hard for me to see that. So yeah. So I'm going to cheat and pull out a hard copy I have here. I'm not sure. It doesn't seem to list unemployment rate just in the way we typically look. So that would be a good thing to compare and contrast or try to look for, but we can check on that. Any other kinds of questions that came up, or comments, or things you learned from this, or things it prompted from anybody? And I'm just going to say that I loved when Canandina said to her, it's all about stewardship, because I think that actually it helps us to remember that whenever we talk about mission and our identity, it is always about stewardship. And in my work, we often talk about stewardship and evangelism go hand in hand. We reach out with the gifts that we have, and we are called upon to use them in the best way, to share in the best way.
Thanks, Sue Ellen. Yeah, and the other piece about stewardship is you've got this building and you've got these people ready to go. How are you stewarding your energy and your space? And it's, sometimes we think we need to grow. Well, how do we steward what we have to be really inviting and to meet people's actual life needs. So we have a couple questions popping up. If I could
Yeah.
do the first one, Sue Ellen, although I know you lived in Hagerstown. So that's a
for it.
town. It says
Yeah.
Hagerstown. I know it's not rural, but it's near some rural areas.
Mhm.
For Scott's question, how do we use this data in a rural setting where distance or geography isn't as applicable? A couple thoughts come to mind. First of all, for us at St. Paul's, which is somewhat rural, but within driving distance of DC and Baltimore, bedroom community still, for that area, it broke us out of being on the edge of the county and thinking about ourselves as part of Howard County. And it enlivened our imaginations about, wow, how do we see our geography beyond some of the county or jurisdictions that we're so used to that we're a little bit stuck in them? So that was helpful. The other piece is to look at what's really happening in terms of growth areas. You know, I saw that Towson was growing their population by 30%. If we look in a rural area and we see that it is declining, like Baltimore City here around the cathedral is declining by 0.42%. So is that less than a percent, Sue Ellen? Is that what that means? Help me with my math.
In which, I'm sorry.
On the cathedral. It says population growth negative 0.42. So I read that they are
that neighborhood is going to have less population.
Right. So some slight decline in the neighborhood. So Scott, if you look in your rural area to see what the decline is, if it is declining or what the growth is, then you can adjust some of the thoughts or some of the things that we say out loud. This area is just declining. Maybe it's not declining that much. Maybe it is. What groups are there? Appreciatively looking at, well, who is here? And what kinds of needs do people have when their community's population is declining? So those would inspire different questions.
I also want to say, I think that distance is important, and even in a rural area, because it tells you how far you are from certain things, and that can inform your ministry. You know, if there's certain things are not close to you. So it does. Or how would people get to you if there's no transportation? So I think that, don't discount yourself just because you're out in a rural area but you may want to go out further than the 15-minute drive time for some questions. We also have a way to say, is there a way to dive into the data to dig deeper into the income versus net worth? Yes. Some of that is when you're on the live digital one, and when you hover over, you can dig down in, and you can also then explore with MapDash, not the neighborhood insight report, but there is a way to gather some more. They have a more active map that you can use to get some of that information. Does the data include the following across state lines? Prisons, nursing homes, schools? That's a good question. I've not looked at one that crossed state lines. If you are near a state,
I think they do.
I think it does.
I think it does
if you're
not.
On a state line border, I think it does.
The other pieces there, prisons, nursing homes, what's exciting about, so there's really, if I could clarify, Sue Ellen, I think there are really two different methods for getting information like this. There's the neighborhood insight, and then there's also MapDash, and they're just a little bit different. And the neighborhood insight is a little more pleasant on the eyes.
Yes.
And for the non-statistician person, demographic person, the infographics are a little cleaner and you can click on them. So there really are two pieces that some congregations access, right, Sue Ellen?
Yes, they either access, or you can then, like, the diocese can help you find that information. But this is, like you said, this is the easiest way to look at it. When you're handed the MapDash tool, you can get lost in a rabbit hole and not even know where you are. So this is a really good starting point. And then,
Right.
but keep track of those kinds of questions, because we do have a way to find that out. There are ways for us to access that information. Sometimes it's easier to have someone else do that for us or with us, you know, in a consult setting. And again, that how close are we to other houses of worship and how many are there? Yes, we can do that through Mapdash. It can show you who else is in your range, where they are, and identify them by denomination or by religion. It can show you that. So that is another piece that's accessible to us.
I would also add it's not a formula. So I think what's fun to do is to pop up your neighborhood insight for your area. And with people who have lived there for a long time and people that are newer, start talking about it and do that conversation and what people know and where they work and who they talk to. Bring that into this so that you are really maximizing what's being revealed. Your folks can probably put on the map where the closest prison is, or where other important community pieces are once you start to engage on these topics.
Yeah. So one thing real quick, and I don't want to steal the thunder from the next workshop, but that, you know, this is some of the skills you've already talked about are how you bring this to life. The learning to talk to people and go out in the neighborhood and have those conversations, just as you were doing earlier with each other, are ways that all of this will come to life. And then the final one is a question, Canon Christopher, for you. Does the diocese have plans to get a data analyst to gather data from all the locations within the diocese to better understand what is needed?
Yeah, great question. I think I saw that pop up on the chat from Lucia. So first, I'm going to jump into that. I want to say thank you, Sue Ellen and Canon Dina, for your great work on this segment, and for everyone's engagement and patience with us during some of because the tech for this one was a little bit different with two off-site presenters. So to Lucia's question, as I think everybody knows, we're in a major shifting time, a transition time within our diocese. Bishop Carey's visions and hopes for the future, she's very much still in a listening space. So all of the deep listening work that Bishop Carey has been doing is not just a formality. It's really because she wants to build relationship, build trust, and get to know where we are. So to say, do we have plans to hire a data analyst to do this? I would say right now, no. In the near future, I could very much imagine that we would. Historically, we've had a relationship with FaithX, and they have worked with an organization called Data Story to build the Mapdash tool to be able to engage this. We are currently piloting something in our diocese called the Vitality Improvement Program. And as any pilot goes, there are lots of challenges in that intense learning phase. And so we've got to figure out how we want to use the resource of Mapdash, for example. And so, as Sue Ellen said, when you're using just the whole system, there are so many different kind of rabbit holes that you can fall down. The thing that I wanted to focus on today was the Neighborhood Insight Report, because it really is a snapshot, and it's something that each of you, I say again, each of you will get for your congregation that has a 15-minute drive time radius. Now, I recognize that in urban settings and in rural settings, like it's not going to mean the same, and it's not going to mean the same for any of the contexts that we're a part of. So it's just meant to be one more tool at our disposal. So I know that's a long answer to a great question, Lucia. Thank you. We do not currently have a plan to hire someone around that. I think we're really trying to assess where we are, use the tools that we have at our disposal, and stay connected, build connection in places where there are not connection. And so much of that is recognizing that for most of our churches, we can do more to love our neighbor as ourselves. Like, we've got all of these people that are a part of our parish, the geographic area around us, so the historic perspective on parish, not just the congregation, that boundary around. So how do we connect with them? One way we can do that, and I think Canon Dina gave some great examples. When you get a little bit of data, it helps you to figure out where you focus that, around working with families that have members that have disabilities. And so like that, you shaped ministry programming around that you then invested in. And so, well, I hope that you had some good learning through the presentation that Canon Dina and Sue Ellen shared on the Neighborhood Insight Report, and how even the smallest amount of demographic information can be helpful to you as you try to engage your wider community and figure out what it means to do ministry in an environment that's changing all the time. How do you make those connections, build those relationships, and learn to see Christ and feel the Spirit as she calls you out into the wider community of which we're called to serve. So over the course of these last 3 presentations, I hope that you've gathered some tools and some information, some insight, and some practices that could be really useful to you wherever you find yourself doing ministry. Again, the Faith Development in Community model from the College for Congregational Development, relational one-to-one meetings as taught through community organizing, and the Neighborhood Insight Report as it's been shared with our diocese through FaithX. So I will not pretend to know what God is doing in your ministry life and in your leadership and in the congregation that you're called to serve, but I am so excited to see how the Holy Spirit might work in and through you as you seek to do ministry wherever you find yourself. So I hope that you'll reach out to us through our website, episcopalmaryland.org. And again, my name is Canon Christopher Linpayne, and I would love to connect with you if there are ways that we can support you in the ministry that you're called to. Until then, God's peace be with you.